Right, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Rose Dravitsky, I'm the Head of Chambers at Clarence. Clarence is an ecosystem of support, workspaces and resources with a really vibrant community of lawyers and professionals, 2 members of which are actually on the panel tonight. We're streaming this live from our York Street location in Sydney. Head to our website to see more about what we do, and please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. We're really happy to be a part of tonight's event on this vital topic. And here to introduce the panellists is Marina Yastrobov, who is the National Convener of the Australian Society for Computers and the Law. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for such a warm welcome. And also you see Anita there in the background. Anita's here from Clarence as well. Thank you so much for being our slide master for the day. You really are in for a treat with the panel that we have planned for you. My name is Marina Yastrobov and I'm the National Convener of the Australian Society for Computers and the Law. We are delighted to co-host this with Clarence and the Internet Australia. Let's begin by acknowledging the First Nations people of the lands in which we meet. Here, I believe it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and of course a very warm welcome to all First Nations people joining us here today. Just recently, Crikey posted an article and it posed this question: how much value has to be stripped from a company's share price before it will publicly act on allegations of sexual harassment? They reported that in the case of AMP Capital, that was 23%. Sexual harassment is expensive. There's high employee turnover, decreased productivity, many more days on sick leave, putting aside the fact that there are also higher insurance premiums, legal expenses and settlement payouts. So when model Kate Upton accused guest co-founder Paul Marcino of harassment over Twitter in February 2018, is it any surprise that there was $250 million wiped off the company's share value in less than a day? So harassment is expensive, but harassment is just one form of incivility, which we'll learn about today. But let's not just look at the financial cost, and I think this is a very important point, because there are considerable human costs involved in incivility. So now to start the conversation, let me introduce you to Phil Roberts, who will then introduce the panel. So a few words on Phil Roberts. Philip is a solicitor whose interest in the internet originated when he was at the University of Macquarie University and working as part of the Asia Pacific Research Institute. The research project had to do with e-commerce and how it facilitated access for small and medium-sized enterprises in the international markets. There, his passion for technology was sparked and then practiced as a technology lawyer for many companies, including Woolworths and Deloitte, and advised even more companies on IT-related agreements. Microsoft, IBM, Gartner, Hewlett-Packard, Fujitsu and Tata Consulting being just some of those companies. But his passion doesn't stop at the workplace. His passion extends to an extensive portfolio of volunteer roles, including for the City of Sydney Law Society, the Australian Society for Computers and the Law, and Internet Australia. He has a boutique practice here at Clarence called PCR Law and Associates. So with great pleasure, I'll now usher them in, do the table swap, if you like, the musical chairs with the 3 panelists who will be joining us here. And of course, we have wonderful Felicity who's joining us online. So bear with me as I'll swap over, and please, Anita, if you could put the next screen on with our panelists on the screen. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Anita.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Philip Roberts and I'll be your MC for today. And my role will be to introduce the speakers, give you the plan of the day, and lead the discussion later on. So, in short, today we're talking about incivility in cyberspace and promoting civility in the workplace. As I think many of us realise, there's been a lot of discussion about sexual harassment within the legal profession and other sectors of the economy. That's a little bit less about bullying, but that's certainly part of what we'll be talking about today. However, the purpose of this event is not to dwell on particular cases, but rather to look at systematic issues and approaches. One point I'd like to make, particularly given that we happen to be coinciding with the timing of the US election, it may be relevant to say that in terms of the topic of civility, if you go online or you do any research yourself, you'll know that there's also a conversation around civility in public. In other words, the level of discord and the way that public discussions are held. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is civility in the workplace. So in relation to that, we will start today's session by watching a video from Professor Christine Porath, who is from Georgetown University Business School, who's also written the book Mastering Civility, a manifesto for the workplace, and she'll be talking now and give us introduction on the topic of civility in the workplace. We'll move now. I'd like to introduce Felicity Lawrence, Dr. Felicity Lawrence. So Dr. Felicity Lawrence has nearly 30 years experience as a leader and manager in the Royal Australian Navy Intelligence, Commonwealth and ACT Public Service. Her experience extends from business and culture transformation, international relations and policy development to project management, program design, workforce reform and facilitator. Felicity founded Happier Workplaces to equip executive leaders and staff in all sectors with a science-based modern solution to rapidly assess and negotiate disruptive online and offline conflict while improving relationships, performance and functionality. Her culture, co-design and civility enrichment products have been applied by over 2,000 clients to fast-track productivity and individual well-being by implementing customized, psychologically safer environments and boundaries. She is currently writing her first book, Adapt and Thrive, Modern Conflict Resolution Solutions to Help You Flourish at Work and Home. I'll pass it over to Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you again, Philip, for inviting me to this. This is a very short introduction to the issue of e-civility in workplaces. That's basically where I'm dealing with. I've worked with over 2,000 clients now, overseas and domestically, both in the legal arena, obviously legal professionals such as yourself, government, healthcare, emergency management, project management, policy and so forth. And frankly, there is incivility, lack of civility online everywhere. We'll be going into what civility actually means at the moment, but very quickly, Philip asked me to very quickly give you a brief update on what my research findings were, because one of the things I wanted to find out when I left the public service, my background's Navy, and I'd seen rather a lot of incivility in that particular time period from the 80s onwards, and the public service also was dealing with quite a bit of incivility due to a lot of culture change. And I found, after talking to quite a number of CEOs, secretaries, managers, leaders, staff, working in healthcare, emergency management, bus drivers, policy makers, legal people such as yourselves, that incivility is everywhere. It's across all ages, genders, creeds. So that probably doesn't surprise anyone. It's also boundaryless. So in other words, it's able to impact people and their families. So because of the ability for the incivility, the online incivility to follow people from work to home, and the capacity for it to go viral, what's now called virality, its capacity for, if someone knows how to use social media, you can get online, and as we've seen in the media, you can really be quite impactful on people's reputation quite quickly. And the escalation tends to, in terms of a work environment, it tends to mix between face-to-face disagreements and online. So in other words, if you've had a bad disagreement, or you've had a bit of a misunderstanding and you're just having a bad day and you see an email popping in and you're just in the wrong frame of mind, then you can escalate that misunderstanding quite quickly. And that's something that I think people don't realise. And unfortunately, once it goes online, you know, again, you've got more power to enhance your ability to reach more people and really impact someone's reputation. Anonymity really does create challenges for people, because if you can actually be, and I've worked with people and talked to people who have said, you know, I've been, you know, these are CEOs as well, by the way. They've been working with people they didn't realise that they had impacted them in some way, and they were basically sitting right next to them or in the same workspace, and these were the people that were bullying them online. So it can be completely anonymous, and that's the scary thing about it. You don't necessarily know who's doing it at all. And it also is very dependent on the what's called the implicit civility at work. You know, those guidelines that you don't talk about, those rules that you don't talk about, but are supported by the implicit rules, your legislation and so forth. But sometimes there's a massive disparity between the explicit environments, you know, the rules, and what's actually really going on. So that's where things can get really nasty. And the last thing I just wanted to talk about, one of the studies I did was the quantitative study of about 300 or 400 people, again, looking at CEOs, managers, secretaries and so forth. And there was very much a mix of task-related incivility and bullying and person-related. And what I mean by that is, you know, I can hound you about, you know, not getting a report in on time, but I can also start picking on you because, you know, you've had a bad hair day or something like that. And so people, there's a real mix between, you know, sort of focusing on someone's inability to, you know, for whatever reason, maybe they've just had something happen at work or at home that's impacting vice versa. So if they're bringing something from home into work in the workplace, and their sort of ability to perform well is starting to erode, then people start to pick on not only their work ability, their professionalism, but also their ability to present themselves in a professional way. And a lot of people, over 74, this was quite surprising, 74% of my survey participants ranked their workplace as highly stressful, and that 47% noted that it negatively impacted on their performance and productivity, and a third reported job dissatisfaction. So this has massive implications in terms of employers, you know, wanting to maintain high efficiencies and effectiveness and productivity in the workplace. One of the other things that a lot of people don't realise is the connectivity between face-to-face, or what I call offline incivility or bullying, and online or cyber or e-incivility or e-civility. So one of the most simple definitions that I've used throughout my academic career and is considered to be accepted in the academic field, the definition of face-to-face bullying is that it's intentional, persistent, and occurs over time by an individual or group that's perceived by the target as more influential or powerful in some way. It doesn't have to be official, just influential, that harms their behaviour is harmful or embarrasses or defames the target's reputation or well-being, against which the target feels powerless to defend themselves. And that's a really important point. So you can't change number one or number two, but you can change whether or not you feel powerless. And again, the online, because, you know, human behaviour basically is moving online now, the same sort of behaviours, even though we're talking about, you know, the ability for technology to be boundaryless. So, you know, you can move between work and home and work. So it's following, you know, this incivility is following people around and between jobs. but it is actually just an escalation, I suppose, or a depiction of human behaviour online. So, and there's a certain level of, because the technology allows people to be anonymous, the perpetrator, you know, when you interview the perpetrators, they feel that they sort of, they avoid the impact of their behaviour on the target because they don't see it. So there's a sort of, you know, it's a little bit like going to war on using video games. You don't see who you know, which villages you're blowing up. And it's the same sort of thing. You just don't necessarily get that sort of sense. You don't see the immediate impact of your behaviour on people. As I touched on before, you know, the excessive reach, anonymity and boundarylessness, but the big thing that most people just don't realise and just don't get is that face-to-face tends to be, you know, between one or two or one in a group of people. It's usually, you know, it can be contained and people can at least go home and get away from it. But with the online incivility or bullying, cyberbullying, you know, the reach is massive and it can be immediate. And as I said, you know, one of the things that's one of the words that's being used these days is virality, you know, the ability for one video or one photo or one comment to go viral, and that's it for your reputation. There's also, from my perspective, working in workplaces, there's a lot of confusion about human behaviour that is deliberate and human behaviour that's accidental or unconscious. And I always try to sort of talk about that anywhere I go because, you know, unfortunately, we're all human. We all have bad days. We all come from different family cultures and we're all bringing in different types of, you know, expected behaviours into the workplace, sort of assuming that we each sort of using the same words and therefore we're expecting to see and hear and witness the same sort of behaviours, and that just doesn't happen. So sometimes each of us can fall into an unconscious or accidental online or face-to-face bully or incivility when, you know, for instance, we're actually having a bad period. Perhaps, you know, your mum or your dad is very unwell, and that extra stress is putting such a load on you that you start to become abrupt at work, and people are starting to think, oh, this person's, you know, Felicity is becoming rude, and she's, you know, where's the courtesy that we expect from her? So there are a lot of reasons, as you can see here, as to why people can become unconscious in terms of either their rudeness or bullying behaviour, or sometimes it can be either, I know this sounds really bad, but sometimes it can be unconscious harassment, where people just don't realise that the behaviour is completely inappropriate in a professional sense until someone points it out to them. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is, in this context, it's really important to give everyone the benefit of the doubt before you sort of rush in and start accusing people. I just don't think accusing people, individuals, is going to be useful. It's much better to focus on the behaviours and discuss what behaviours is going to be accepted, you know, what common boundaries, what common behaviours we accept in the work environment, and each work environment can be different. I'm just sharing this behaviour intervention methodology with you today because one of the things I find fascinating, and this is always a bit of an eye-opener for everyone has an epiphany here, is that there is a occupational violence scale here. So Professor Kevin Kellaway in Canada has developed quite a few editions now of the handbook of workplace violence, and he talks about things such as incivility, disrespect, abuse and so forth, and how that actually can morph up the vertically up the occupational violence scale. So in other words, you can have an environment which starts off as having you know, rudeness and lack of courtesy and so forth, which is considered to be incivility. But then over time, that could then lead into drama-based behaviour, you know, eye-rolling, you know, behaviour, people coming into work and bitching about each other, that type of thing. That's called drama. And disrespect, you know, not turning up to work on time or turning up to meetings on time or that sort of thing. And it can actually really escalate very gradually up through the occupational violence scale. What people don't realise, and that's one of the things I found in my research, is that incivility can, over time, if you consider the definition of face-to-face bullying, incivility, if it's persistent, conducted by someone that the target perceives as more powerful or influential, who is conducting behaviour that is embarrassing or defaming the target's reputation, against whom the target feels powerless to defend themselves, over time incivility morphs into bullying. So one of the things I worked with Kevin Kellaway on was that his occupational violence scale isn't just vertical, it's horizontal. And people get a real eye opener there and sort of go, well, incivility can be quite detrimental to our workplace productivity, well-being and efficiency. So just because we call it incivility doesn't necessarily mean you sort of push it under the rug and say, you know, it's okay, we can ignore it. I wanted to bring something to you today that perhaps you weren't aware of, although I'd be surprised if you weren't. But as you probably are aware, the International Bar Association report from May 2019, it was called Us Too, Bullying and Sexual Harassment in the Legal Profession. It was developed by, or pulled together by, Kieran Pender in the IBA Legal Policy and Research Unit, and they just pulled together some statistics which I thought you might be interested in, considering this is your profession. One of the things that I found interesting working with legal professionals is that you're highly intelligent, very focused on delivering, and one of the things that you have a lot in common with academics, funnily enough, is that because you're so highly intelligent, you tend to just ignore or you don't put at a high priority those common courtesies. I had a 40-minute conversation with one legal person who said, I don't see any reason why I should say hello to everyone in the morning because I'm going to interrupt their train of thought. And everyone else was saying, but that's a common courtesy. We think you're you're not happy if you come in and you don't say good morning. Therefore, we're all walking on eggshells. And he said, I didn't realise that, you know. So it can be as simple as that. So I won't go into all of this. I'm sure that I can share the actual report with you if you don't have it. But I just found it really interesting that there's a lot of things here that, frankly, you have in common with academia. And I think, as I say, that's because that highly intelligent. And also, I think your profession is that you have to dig into an issue and pull it apart. And one of the things that I found interesting looking at this was there were some not massively high divorce rates, but there was an indication that because, you know, your mindset is so focused on, okay, we have to pull this thing apart. If you can't switch that off when you go home, there's a possibility that you could be doing that at home as well. And, you know, your partners and your kids aren't going to appreciate that. So I just found that interesting from an academic perspective. This International Bar Association provided some recommendations which are pretty logical from my perspective in terms of raising awareness, revising, implementing policies. But I think this is really important, introducing regular training and also increasing that dialogue of, you know, what is expected in the work environment. Because a lot of times, just because I'm talking about respect, my definition in my head about what respect is, what disrespect looks and sounds like, can be completely different to yours. So it's incredibly useful just to even have that discussion in a round table situation. That's frankly what I try to do when I go into workplaces, is say, well, how do you view disrespect or incivility, whether it be online or offline, and how do you want to be treated at work? And you start to develop behaviours and common boundaries. And the easiest thing then is just to implement those and measure them over time. And that's part of my 4-step wellbeing, culture and civility enrichment program, which which is a very simple program, 4-step program to actually take people through that process. So I'll finish here. I'll see whether I can stop sharing. And I'm done.
Good for you, Felicity. Thank you very much for that. It was terrific. What we're going to do is have the 3 presentations and have a panel discussion, and we'll deal with all the questions there, just to manage the time involved here. Thank you very much, Felicity. I'd now like to introduce Elizabeth Devine. Elizabeth is a specialist in employment law and conflict management. She is founder of Devine Law at Work, a law firm and consultancy which specialises in employment law, workplace relations and conflict management. In this role, she provides a range of services to private and public sector employers. Elizabeth's qualifications include a Master's of Dispute Resolution, a Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Arts. She has been practising law for 29 years and has specialised in all aspects of Australian employment law, workplace relations and conflict management for 24 years. In addition to her legal skills and qualifications, Elizabeth is a conflict coach, facilitator, mediator, educator and workplace investigator. Prior to founding her own firm, Elizabeth worked for the Australian Government Solicitor in a peak employer body and in private practice. Elizabeth is passionate about enhancing the knowledge of others about workplace law and conflict management, and regularly presents to a broad range of corporations and business and professional and industry groups. I'll pass it across to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Philip. Well, as Philip mentioned, I've been specialising in area of employment for 25 years. The reason why it continues to this day to fascinate me is because it's fundamentally all about human beings and the various complexities that brings. I think when we're talking about issues to do with incivility and civility, we're essentially talking about old problems and new technology. There is absolutely nothing new about people behaving in ways that others don't find acceptable. There's nothing new about conflict between people. In fact, if you're a student of history as I am, you'll know that the history of mankind is the history of conflict. And we have in many and varied forms over millennia sought to find ways in which to operate in a more civil fashion and meeting the various tensions that we're up against. And one of those key tensions that we find in the 21st century, 20 years into it, is very much the juxtaposition of the individual versus the other or the group. And this is, again, nothing new to human experience. And so in an era in which there's a lot of messaging about I've got rights, I've got freedom of speech, blah, 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 what you meet in the workplace is very much individuals who are quite frankly shocked at the thought that their behaviour might not satisfy their employers' expectations. I was speaking earlier about, sitting across from a 25-year-old young man, young enough to be my son, a few years ago, who had sent completely inappropriate photos of a part of his body to a co-worker. And I still remember him saying to me, well, what's the problem? Like, he just didn't get it. Now, as an older person, I might be shocked at that. But as a practitioner, what I have to be able to do is understand the fact that he genuinely didn't understand what the problem was. So the problem is less about his perceptions versus anyone else's, but more about how do you fix this problem. Which brings me to the other key tension that we meet when we're dealing with issues to do with civility or people's behaviour generally, is this desire for simplicity. Now, us lawyers, we have a natural bias towards rules. I do a lot of presentations and I hear employment lawyers in particular constantly say, well, as long as we have policies, as long as we do training, everything will be hunky-dory. It simply isn't. If we look at something like, one of the good news about the legal system is that we have, in the 70s, 80s and 90s, we saw an extraordinary amount of human rights legislation introduced in this country. And there's not a shadow of a doubt that it was at the right time in terms of how the society felt, but it was also driving people's expectations. So it was a push-pull factor. And so, almost 40 years from the introduction of Sexual Discrimination Act, and more than 40 years since the introduction of Racial Discrimination Act, we still have those problems. Having a law does not solve the problem. If you already are minded to comply and behave in an appropriate fashion, it's not going to be an issue for you. For those who have difficulty with this, and we definitely have this pressure in our profession, we are trained to be adversarial, we are trained to argue cases, and the reality is that frankly, we are a competitive, aggressive profession, and we think that's a good thing, right? That's our advantage, is it not? However, when we take that to the interpersonal connection within law firms and otherwise, we see a lot of problems in terms of people's behaviour. And the reality is things have changed. We have a much more diverse profession and a much more diverse workplace, whether it's legal or otherwise, and that's a disruptive factor. So what I see a lot of is people saying, oh, everything was fine in the past. Why is there a problem now? Because guess what? There might be more women in the workplace who are saying, actually, I'm old enough to remember the 90s where it was not that unusual to have people download pornography in the workplace and openly discuss it. That's gone. I actually remember the technology before that, because I know the case law, where people used to have photos of bare-breasted women up on the wall. And that was considered normal and acceptable, and that has changed. And so what we see is, when you have people of different backgrounds, different value systems, etc., you're going to have disruptive, and I mean that in a neutral sense of disruption. I think disruption is great because it causes us to think differently and not make assumptions. And so when we see conflict over behaviour, it's not necessarily a bad thing. What it actually tells us is there may be other modes of thinking, other ways of behaving that cause us to rethink. One standard is to say if everybody behaves in a certain way, is the effect positive or negative? And that's one way to measure what is good or bad or indifferent. But things that have worked for people with power in the past may come as a shock because, we moved from a power model, which is very much what we've had on, until perhaps 20 years ago, through to a rights model where people are much more about I have these rights, through to the next logical component to that is an interest model that says it's in our interest to get on, it's in our interest to resolve conflict. How can we do that together and deal with it? So our tendency as lawyers is to say, well, as long as we write it all down, we'll be fine. I heard a lot of, after the Dyson Hayden scandal broke in the profession a few months ago, there was a lot of, the solution is, let's write it down. Now that's part of the picture. But ultimately, it begs the question, if these policies have been in place, social media policies, etc., have been in place and people still breach them, if sexual harassment policies have been and people still breach them, there's a much tougher question. We'd like it to be simple, but it's not simple, it's complex. We need to make sure we're recruiting people on the basis of actually questioning not what fabulous qualifications they've got, right? Not which big companies they've worked for or which big firms, but in fact, how do they behave? And how do they behave in particular when under pressure? What skills, what competencies do they have to deal with conflict? Because if they don't have a broad range of skills, what will happen is they will revert to what they know, what they were taught as children, what they were taught at law school, what they were taught in courts. They will revert to that. That will be their solution. So unless we have a competency focus and a behaviour focus, whereby we recruit people less on the basis of form, but substance, then we'll continue to have this problem. But ultimately, civility is not either gender or culture neutral. And I think it's an important thing. There's a lot of assumptions about civility that are about the idea that, well, if we all just behave in this particular way, everything will be fine. People of different cultures express themselves differently. People of different genders express themselves differently. All the variety and richness of life means that we're not all going to behave in the same way. But what is the bottom line? Well, what we say in workplace law, particularly in work health and safety, the bottom line is I have the right to come to work and feel safe, not just physically, but psychologically. And psychological safety is essential in the workplace. It's what enables us to perform to our highest level. It's what enables us to raise issues at an early stage rather than let them, only be revealed once they're massive. These are the more complex ways of dealing with things rather than just saying, if we have a policy or a law, that will solve the problem. It's part of the picture, but not all of the picture. And fundamentally focusing on competency, in my view, is the essential ingredient. We have, if we teach people, and I think there's a great hunger for it, if we teach people how to deal with conflict in a range of different ways, then we're going to be able to resolve these issues. Conflict is less a problem in itself and more about how we respond to it. So when we try to control it, when we try to punish, and I'm not saying there aren't circumstances in which it's right to dismiss someone because they behaved appallingly or give them a warning. I'm not saying that. But by and large, unless we adopt a more complex and sophisticated approach, we'll continue to see problems, not just in our profession, but across the board in workplaces. That's my time.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you for being so prompt. I'd now like to introduce John McKenzie. John is at the Office of the Legal Services Commissioner. Welcome the appointment to John McKenzie as the new Legal Services Commissioner for New South Wales from 12 March 2015. A solicitor for 34 years, he has worked primarily as an accredited specialist in criminal law, largely for the Aboriginal Legal Service and on the staff of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Death in Custody. He has also worked for some years in private practice, legal aid and community legal centres. He was appointed the New South Wales Legal Services Commissioner in 2015 to head the Office of the Legal Services Commissioner, which has the statutory responsibility for all complaints against lawyers. Mr McKenzie has been reappointed as the Legal Services Commissioner for a period of 5 years from the 28th of February 2019. I'll pass it to you, John.
Thank you, Philip, and good afternoon to you all. And those in different time zones, good day or good evening to you all. We do have a serious problem with lack of civility in the legal profession, and we're not the only profession that has that problem. I have a particular concern about it because we as a profession, and I strongly believe in the wonderful nature, goals and history of our profession, we are supposed to be the defenders of the rule of law, and yet in Australia, behaviour that we've been talking about today in this webinar, that especially meaning referring to bullying and sexual harassment, that has been unlawful behaviour in workplaces since 1984. It has also been a breach of the solicitor and barrister conduct rules for over 10 years now. And it's not a very good example for us as the supposed standard bearers of the defending the rule of law to flout our own noses at a very, very important legal responsibility that we have. Generally, in relation to civility or lack of it, I think it does come back, there is of course always a personal and a systemic side of any issue like this. I'm interested in looking at the systemic side of it to start with. I do wonder, in fact, I have formed a view that part of our problem has been an increasing emphasis, or perhaps just blindly accepting the repeated mantra, we are a business. Well, my response to that is, no, we as lawyers are not just a business. We may need to conduct our practice in such a way as to certainly provide a reasonable and livelihood for ourselves and our families, but we are more than that. We are a profession, and there are not very many occupational groups who have a overriding responsibility in the rules of their profession and the law that regulates the profession to have the paramount duty to the court and to the proper administration of the system of justice. And second only to that, is our overriding responsibility to our clients. Somewhere along the line, the idea of us being only a business, I suspect, has been eating away at the importance and the regard that we as a profession and the leaders of our profession have been given to this particular issue. And I think it's great that a seminar like this is talking about it and bringing it out from under the covers, so to speak. In relation to the sexual harassment and bullying, the reason why I think it's a particular issue for the legal profession, firstly, is that there is a very serious loss of really talented young lawyers, predominantly young female lawyers, from the profession, in particular from the private practice part of our profession. And that is a matter of great regret. It is a matter of loss to us as a profession. It is a great regret. Also, I have a very strong view about law and the rule of law being one of the buttresses against abuses of power. That's where our historical base as an occupational group and profession comes from. And yet what I'm seeing in this type of behaviour, particularly in bullying and sexual harassment within the practice of law, is in fact a most serious abuse of power. And it should be of great concern to all in the profession. It certainly is to me. I'm trying to take steps following on from some of those very practical recommendations that Felicity showed us earlier from the International Bar Association's report of last year, and putting and setting up, or in the process still of setting up, some alternative avenues for reporting of this matter, in particular from bystanders. I think it's really important that we adopt the saying that Lieutenant General gave to his troops just a few years ago, that the standard we walk past is the standard we adopt. And I think that as lawyers, we have a real responsibility to speak up when we may witness any harassment or bullying, even if it's of a minor form, simply verbal stuff, because that's where a lot of the nastier problems that I see do start off and escalate from there. And I think that there's a lot to be said for us to try and think, well, what we really need is a change in the culture within our profession. I think it's indisputable that we have a system of hierarchical power within our profession. That serves us very well when it comes to case precedent and appellate court systems and so on. But it is open to abuse by those who are unscrupulous in the use of their power. And that really strikes at the heart of what we as a profession, I believe, should be standing for, and I believe most of us who join the profession want to stand for, and that is to be a buttress and a protection for all against the abuse of power. So it is a serious thing. We need to take a lot more notice of it. We need to be holding the leaders of our workplaces, the primary people responsible for changing this culture. There's never going to be enough regulators like me or professional bodies like law societies and bar associations to be able to go around and stamp it out ourselves. It's not going to happen that way. I also agree with earlier comments that simply giving continuing professional development, though important in itself, if by virtue of the fact that this behaviour is still at a most unacceptable level still happening within our profession in Australia, it demonstrates that that's not enough either. And what we need is it is a workplace safety issue, as has been said well by Elizabeth just before me. And to that point, I think that where we need to ram home the ultimate responsibility for changing this culture so that people actually do get psychological safety in the workplaces are the workplace's leaders, so the principals of solicitor firms, the heads of chambers, and so on. This is where we need to be doing a lot more work. We need to be getting all of those leaders in all of those workplaces, whether they be the big multinational firms, whether they be the sole practitioner firms with the occasional employed junior solicitor. If you are the leader in a workplace, you have a professional and a legal responsibility not to be allowing others to be doing harassing, bullying, or acting with great incivility. So that's where I think the responsibility needs to to be properly sheeted home to. In relation to it going online and the use of computers in particular, certainly I think that there is great potential that it does morph into that. I would say this though, and it's not particularly in the area of sexual harassment or bullying like that, but I'm aware of a complaint I had to deal with earlier this year, where a group of lawyers, court-going criminal lawyers in fact, had a Facebook, they thought, a closed, confined Facebook group, and started sharing posts about a particular sitting judge in a particular regional court. And it started off with what was a statement of fact, which proved to be completely false. Now, the judge was alerted to this ongoing practice by someone within that group who I don't know, and the judge promptly lodged a complaint with me against every single member of that Facebook group. By the time we sorted all of this out, and it was sorted out with due apologies and removals from the social media outlet, it is a salutary lesson to all is that anything that is put online is permanently there and accessible to all. And you really don't know who in the end is going to see this email, see this post on social media and so forth. So everyone needs to really remember that things that get pressed with that send button, they are permanent. In some place in the world that we live in now, some very smart person with a very big machine can retrieve it without question. So I think it's a salutary lesson to us all. And I'll end on this thought. I think that we may be falling into the trap of paying only lip service to our requirement to be civil and courteous in the practice of our law practices. And I think we're in danger in that regard of really being left with the situation where all we're going to end up with are tired lips unless we actually do some real action about it. So I'll end with that thought.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for your address, and thank you for all the speakers' address. We'll take a few questions, and there's got a few questions in the chat box. It's really livened up in the last few minutes. We've got quite a number of them. There's one question that I would like to put to any and all of the speakers. One of my particular interests in this area of civility is the approach that Christine Porath takes to these issues, and many other facilitators like Felicity. It seems to me that this approach is different to being against harassment or bullying in terms of promoting civility in the workplace, in the sense that it's a more holistic approach in terms of building up the quality of behaviours and relationships in a workplace, so that it never. The theory is that if the levels of civility in a workplace is strong enough, and that may be involved in even attention to behaviours as simple as politeness in the workplace, greeting each other in the morning, building up those sorts of politeness and quality relationships, that the behaviour never reaches the more extreme forms of incivility in terms of sexual harassment or bullying. Would you like to comment on that? Do you see that as assisting the approach or not? I'll open that to anybody. Perhaps John, would you like to start?
I'll lead off and say I think it can only help. I think it's a great thing to do. I think there needs to be a setting of culture, and you've got to behave it, not just say it. But I'll also say this, it can be a smokescreen for those who actually have got no intention of stopping their under-the-counter behaviour, and it's not enough. It's a great thing, it's a building block, but it's not enough.
Yes. Oh, look, it's all part of the picture. There's no doubt about that. But again, I mean, if you do a simple experiment with the word respect and ask a group of 20 people what respect means, I've done this a number of times, you'll find they generally have different meanings to different people. We care a lot about how we are personally treated, and there's a lot of research that says we care less about how we treat others. And that's unfortunately the human experience. And so the reality is the problem with prescription always is the fact that it assumes that it's a neutral concept, that everyone kind of gets what it means. And the truth is that people have very different value systems, very different ways of operating, very different things that have worked for them. I mean, there's a reason why a certain type of person is supposedly at the top of our profession. There's a reason, because they're rewarded for that. And so when people are shocked that people at the top of the profession behave in a certain way, how could that happen? Well, because they've been rewarded for certain things and not punished for others or corrected. So as long as we think being prescriptive or defining things, okay, so our lawyer bias, it'd be lovely if it was that simple, but it's part of the picture, but not all of it.
Right, Felicity?
Yeah, I agree with those comments. I've found that it's highly the concept of what respect or disrespect or bullying or any of the other things. I can go into a workplace and they may decide that, you know, their particular issue is bullying, but in actual fact, it's drama. You know, drama is sometimes the lowest form of sort of percolating behaviours and communication that you don't pick up on generally, but it's usually a key or a flag to say there's something going on here. And what I tend to do, and it's incredibly simple, is just do what you suggested before, which is, you know, you sit down with people and say, well, okay, your concern is drama, your concern is respect or disrespect. Let's talk about that. Let's define where drama-based behaviours occur or disrespect occurs. Then you start to, when you write it down, you suddenly realise, and it consistently happens over and over again, that people tend to use the same sort of examples of this is disrespect or this is drama-based behaviour. And once you sort of collect it all together, it's incredibly easy then to write up common boundaries, what I call common boundaries. So then they turn into the sort of foundation stone for your culture, and they're sort of, you can call it any which way you want. I've called it a culture contract, a culture plan, or anything like that. But basically, if you have 5 or 6 common boundaries, plus you have to have that plus a little toolkit that allows you, that you all have, that allows you to use the same language when you do see someone coming in, obviously having a bad day, someone's just thrown up on me, I'm about to scream, you know, or I've had a hissy fit or something, or the coffee's just poured over me, you know. You need to have those little tools that we all have, that we all commonly know how to use, and it's a common language to gently and respectfully pull each other up in a way that develops the relationship, so that the drama doesn't morph into incivility and doesn't morph into conflict. Not that I'm saying conflict is bad. I think conflict can sometimes clear the air, but if you need to be able to do it in a way that, as you were saying before, is mutually respectful and everyone is on the same sort of common scenario, using the common sort of music sheet. So that's, yeah.
Having policies in the workplace and putting them up on paper, as Elizabeth has pointed out, and implementing steps towards to making it real within the workplace. What sort of other steps besides just having policies?
Well, we have to walk the talk. You know, employers generally are really good these days. They'll hire a fabulous law firm who'll write something beautiful for them, or a consultant of some other variety who'll write something for them. People in Australia have an incredibly good BS detector. And if they do not see the people in power in the organisation or influence actually living by that, so it means that the whole organisation, it's not enough to write a beautiful document, you have to actually live it. So that means, at a very basic level, is you actually have to consult with your stakeholders as to what they actually think matters. What you see all too often is employers imposing culture from above, and they'll say, because this looks beautiful, and then not live by it. So they'll send very conflicting messages. They'll say, everything is about competition. You've got to get, you know, in law firms, you know, we've been reduced from people who are highly intelligent, highly educated, creative, interesting people to units of production. As taking up what John said about us going from profession to business, and this endless tension between the two. And so what we end up having is people who have to bill, and if they don't bill, then a whole lot of consequences flow from that. And we wonder why they behave or why they are sensitive to various things. If we don't have a culture that says we value the human being, and live it every single day, which frankly, if I could just add something Felicity said, it is about actually understanding we have bad days. Like the cancel culture in our society that says as soon as someone does something wrong, they're gone, is really problematic, because guess what? One day that might be you. And whilst I'm not saying we should ever accept bad behaviour, I'm definitely not saying that. Understanding we are human is a real problem broadly in society. And so if we can be, as Felicity said, I'm going to help you, right? I'm going to understand you, but I'm still going to let you know that's not on. That's a far more effective approach than I'm going to give you a warning, I'm going to sack you, there's going to be some other consequence.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've had a lot of questions from participants. It's impossible for me to put all of them, but I will say that we've got questions about whether temporary employment contracts has a chilling effect on calling out incivility, bullying and harassment, whether we need a whistleblowing system for anti-civility, and those sorts of things, and whether the answers are just simple enough about do unto others as you would have done unto you. Who would like to comment on that? Would you like to?
I think all of the above, really. That yeah, I think we do need to just behaviour. Behaviour speaks much more loudly than words. We as lawyers are great at the wordsmiths. I think that what we need is for everyone to actually start behaving in a more respectful, courteous way to each other, to our clients, to opposing parties, to everyone involved, and just start setting the example and then calling people out who might not do that, who we have any authority over. That's what I would say.
Elizabeth, would you like to comment?
Yeah, look, I think, ultimately it comes down to, I noticed in those questions, and this is certainly not a criticism, the instinct for punishment. And think about that, because it's easy for us to, and I'm not taking away from the incredibly important need for our profession to be regulated and the society to be regulated. But at the end of the day, we have a cultural instinct for punishment. And the reality is that's also aggressive, and that's also lacking in civility. And I think it's very easy for us to judge the behaviour of others, and it's far harder for us to ask, when we think about systemic issues, if we have a fundamentally punitive approach to people, what will we produce? Is it just an exercise of power, or is it actually that we want to be corrective? So in the workplace, the fundamental principles that underpin employment law, particularly in relation to behavioural issues, is about correction. Correction is different to punishment. And what we hear in this culture all the time is, as long as if I've got more power than you and I can come in and threaten you, then that's how I'll get you to do the right thing. That, to be frank, is very outdated thinking, and we need to be more sophisticated if we want to see change in our profession or in the broader society, to understand what is human behaviour all about, and why are there challenges, and not thinking simple solutions are the solution.
Felicity, would you like to have the last word in terms of that?
Thank you. I agree with what both Philip and Elizabeth are saying there. That's pretty much on the mark. And I think one of the things that people don't realise is it can be, I know this is basically my bread and butter, but it can be quite a simple thing to turn it around, because a lot of what we're talking about here is simply giving people a framework to use to feel safe enough to say, oh, okay, that behaviour, not the person, that behaviour didn't, it actually crossed my personal boundaries or the common boundaries. And this is, and have a tool to just gently bring that person along, and build the relationship. So because a lot of the things that a lot of the behaviours that I find, frankly, is due to stress, due to uncertainty because of change, and also just fear of having to deal with something like drama or conflict. And not wanting to deal with it because they don't know quite how, and they've seen it going wrong in the past. They've tried to do something in the past that's blown up in their face, and they've just, do you know what I mean? Yeah, it can be a very simple exercise to fix that, is what I'm saying. But thank you.
A bit over time, I'm now going to thank all the speakers for your excellent presentations. I'm going to hand over to Marina Yesteboff in a moment. I will say that if you're wanting to take a step in understanding incivility in the workplace and managing civility and promoting it, you can't go past taking the step of reading Christine Porath's book. I've read it earlier this year, found it completely fascinating and helped me understand a lot. But there's a lot of literature out there and very good work being done by a lot of professionals, and we have the best of the best right in front of you right now. Thank you very much for the speakers. I'm now going to pass up for a vote of thanks to Marina Yesteboff, who will take the chair.
Hello. Lovely to be with you all. Firstly, sorry, if we could have the previous slide, please, Nita. Apologies that we didn't get to all of the questions. This is a very rich topic, and hopefully we can have future sessions where we'll address those questions. It was very heartening to see such a live discussion in chat. Every speaker prompted a lot of questions and comments, and not surprisingly, because this is a topic I'm sure many of us find very dear. We feel very privileged to have such a wonderful panel of speakers. You can see their images there up on the screen. One incredible panel, and so gave so very generously of their time, of their experience, and also even sharing the frameworks that they employ in order to be civil in their workplaces. And it's learning from each other that really counts, I think, in this space. The ability to be open, to feel safe with your colleagues was very well shown today. So thank you very much, John, for your time. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And Felicity over there in cyberspace over in Melbourne. We're very grateful for your time. And of course, Philip, for your passion, your drive in making this event possible. And we do certainly look forward to future discussions. Thank you for driving this forward, Philip. Much appreciated. Let's all be champions of workplace change. Let's all be champions of civility, because, I believe it's attributed to Gandhi. Let's be the change we want to see in the world. And with us, we can make some fantastic strides forward. In lieu of gifts, in this age of COVID, we would like to donate on behalf of all speakers to an educational charity, and we'll be doing that on the 26th of November for our end of year function. So if you're able to join us either in person or online, we'll be delighted for you to do so. Thank you so much for joining. Those in the audience, thank you for staying the course, and please keep the dialogue going. Anita, thank you for sharing the next screen. Here is a quick plug for our next event, which will be held on the 10th. We will be discussing the future of boards. Of course, with data and algorithms taking such prominence in the way that society is run, even our corporations are run, it's an important conversation to be had around the impact of data on decision making. Are the way that our boards composed appropriate for the society in which we live, and how can sustainability be achieved? Hopefully there will be a thread there on civility also, because it's such a very important topic. Clarence, our kind co-hosts who gave us this premises and also support in the background, there is their their web address, and Internet Australia also co-hosts this event. That's where you can find them. So again, thank you very much to our wonderful speakers for their time, for Clarence and our other co-host, Internet Australia, and we look forward to keeping the dialogue open. Have a lovely evening. Take care.